Hey, welcome to the Vintage Vibe.
Where's the music? Let's start this again. This week on the Vintage Vibe, grown man plays with airplane table. Seriously though, this week on the Vintage Vibe, part 2 of the turntable shootout. My apologies for having to wait for it. You know, we get distracted in life, but vintage audio must come first. So we're going to take a peek at the dual turntables to start. I think we got 2 of them. Then we'll move to the Elac, and I'm going to try to sneak in there the Mitsubishi, because I'd really rather not make a 3rd episode around this. And if for some freak of nature reason I have to, I won't make you wait another month. Anyhow, first we look at the turntables, then we talk about the turntables, and then we decide whether we like the turntables. All of that and a whole bunch more complicated educated discussions right here on the Vintage Vibe.
Enter the Dual 1218. Believe it or not, Dual started manufacturing turntables all the way back in 1935. Their name became synonymous, well, with quality. This German manufacturer was to turntables kind of like what Mercedes-Benz was to cars. Dual was known for its large synchronous motors, heavy platters, and the idler platform. The 1218 was sometimes referred to as the poor man's 1219, but it was an exceptional turntable. It did have a smaller platter, a different tone arm, and a different motor. But the 1218 offered 33, 45, and 78 RPM settings. It was fully automatic and offered an adjustment for 7-inch, 10-inch, or 12-inch records. The 1218 was an exceptional performer. Fantastic for times when Aunt Edna's had a little bit too much to drink. With the flick of a switch, Dr. Dual does it all for you. And then Aunt Edna can enjoy her Engelbert Humperdinck, or in this case, we're rocking out a little bit of a ZZ Top here. And it does provide provisions for manual cueing. Very simple to use turntable once set up properly. These things just run like a clock. And as you can see, once it hits the end, well, again, Dr. Dual has got you covered. No need to spill your drink. Just let the turntable do all the hard work for you. 1, 2, 3. There we go. A properly operating Dual 1218. I mean 1218. Now here's a few maintenance tips.
We're just about to do some work on the Dual 1218. First thing we're going to do is remove the cover. And there's a little cap that goes over the spindle, which you can remove. And there's a little C-clip that you can gently remove with a pair of pliers. I use whatever this style plier is. It works quite good. Unfortunately, I don't know the proper name for it. And then gently pull up on the platter, and it should remove as such nicely. Be sure when you place it down not to place it on the shaft at risk of damaging any of those little gear spindles.
once we've got that out of the way, you can then take a peek at the idle wheel, which is right here. This is a brand new one, we can tell. And we can also adjust, which we're going to do in this video, this little, we'll call it like a spindle that the idle wheel runs on, which adjusts the speed. Right now I have to turn the pitch to full to get close to 33 RPM, and that is just because where this idle wheel makes contact with the actual spindle, you lift the spindle or lower the spindle, you can actually adjust the speed. That's what we're going to do. So here is a close-up of the actual wheel, and I'm going to grab a screwdriver here just for reference. This is the spindle that I was referring to that the wheel makes contact with, and if you were to adjust the contact point of the wheel with the spindle, higher will actually reduce the speed, lower will increase the speed. There is one tiny little screw, you can just barely see the set screw just right here, that we have to loosen to adjust it. Unfortunately, sometimes you can't get the screwdriver on the proper angle, and you'll have to actually undo these kind of bolts here to remove it. And to do that, we have to remove this little clip on the top of the idle wheel and move it out of the place to access it. There we go, the wheel's been removed. We're not going to risk getting any grease from our fingers on any of the components. Now we can not a little bit easier to access this actual set screw. I've already tried to do it. It's a little too tight. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to loosen it off. You could use pliers, as I'm going to attempt. And typically just a little tiny bit of force, and they should come off. So we just had to put a little more force, and we broke the other one free as well. Now the motor is going to want to fall, so before you undo that last screw or I guess nut, it would be advisable to put your hand underneath of it so that it just doesn't fall directly on the your work surface or your table. And now it should just ever so gently lower. There we go. And the motor is released, so we'll give you a peek of it in 1 second. So here's the motor. We've got a set screw right here, and this little set screw, all we need to do is grab hold of the spindle and give it a little turn just to break it free. There we go. And now what we're going to do is we're going to slightly push up on the spindle to adjust the height, which we're just going to gently do with our screwdriver. There we go. And I'm now going to lock this one into position. So I've adjusted the spindle up higher so the idle wheel rides lower, which should increase the speed. Now, I don't know a per se recipe to do this without putting it back in and testing where it is. If anyone has any sort of experience, a good tip or trick, feel free to share it in the comments. But there we go. Now we're going to clean this whole area as well too, because as you see, I'm just wearing one glove. Should have had two on. And any sort of greases from your finger is going to adjust the performance of the motor. So the motor basically just goes as such back into position. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clean the surface here of this little spindle. Again, I should be wearing two gloves, make it kind of easier to work for sure. But once we've got that surface cleaned as such, just like that, That should be good. If you can reduce the slippage of the idle wheel, then you're improving the accuracy of the speed. So we're going to switch over the glove to the other hand here for a second. And what we're going to do next is just clean the outer edge of the wheel. So we're literally just running our alcohol around the edge of the wheel, rotating it as such. And once that's cleaned off, we've now got a good clean surface, and we can go ahead and we can test the actual speed of our turntable. See if we have any sort of improvement. Another thing that you may want to do is, while you're at it, clean the inner kind of edge of the actual rim on the turntable. Remembering, if you've touched this at all and you have any sort of finger grease on it, you will cause slippage. We don't want any of that. So, gone ahead and we've cleaned that, and we're now reassembling this. Now, whether or not you want to put the C-pin back in there or not, completely up to you. I'm not going to. It's a hassle. Let's test it for speed and be right back. Well, we're about to get started with the speed app. So here we go. If you're feeling dizzy, that's because you're in the speed app right now. We're using an RPM app for our Android phone. And right now we see 33.35 RPM. We can manage with that and adjust from there. Thanks for coming for the ride. So to summarize, this, in my opinion, is a gorgeous turntable. Now, they did come with a whole bunch of different cases. Usually not as nice as what you're seeing here. This was from a different dual turntable, and it was separately veneered. But these tables really had all the features that you needed. There was very little plastic used in the construction, aside from maybe the cam wheel in these things. The 1218 used that 4-pole synchronous motor, where basically a ring magnetically locks the stator and helps maintain that speed. So they, once set up proper, had great speed control. Again, if you could live with the slightly smaller platter on these ones, smaller than the 1219, the slightly shorter arm, they really were fantastic turntables.
Looks like I got a little more material than I thought here, but hopefully you're getting something out of that, because if you do, think maybe an idler or a dual is for me, they can be a little intimidating sometimes because they kind of look like a Swiss watch. But if you know how to tweak and adjust and what the common kind of hiccups are to get them running properly, they can be really rewarding. So why don't we do this? We're going to do the 1219 next, run it a little bit longer than normal, the video, and we will come back to wrap up with the Elac and the Mitsubishi, because again, we're kind of at that 2 turntables per episode, it seems right now. Let's go take a look at the other dual.
The 1219 is possibly the most sought-after dual turntable because of its large synchronous motor, its nearly 6.8-pound platter, and the fact that, well, it just sounds great. Unfortunately, like most vintage tables, this 1219 required a little service. And as you can see here, well, it kind of looks like a watch underneath. And most of the moving components required some degreasing and application of new lubricants. Thankfully, there's some great manuals out there where you can go step by step, and you can properly pick what requires oil versus a grease. And just like the 1218, the brass pulley required some cleaning, as did the idler wheel, in order to maintain proper speed control. So I've gone ahead and cleaned that up, gotten off all the old rubber, and adjusted the height of the pulley.
Unfortunately, when I got that thing all put back together, after listening a little bit of music through it, I was noticing at low volume a very distinct kind of rumbling sound. And the only thing I could figure out is that it was coming specifically from the motor. So I had to pull that large synchronous motor out and try to open it up to oil it. There is no oiling port on this motor. You can't just put a couple drops down into it and expect it's going to do something. It's actually a sealed motor. And one of the most difficult things with the 1219 motor is actually cracking that motor open, especially after it's been sitting there for, I don't know, 50 plus years. So that requires a little bit of patience and a little bit of muscle. But when you do it, this is kind of what it's going to look like inside. Now, take time to clean the components, and there actually is kind of a little well in there that you'll put some drops of oil in and lubricate it, and then you could reassemble it. And thankfully after that, the noise was gone.
So last steps, a good polish of that cover as well as a re-oil of the wood, followed by an inspection of the needle and, well, a balancing of the arm.
Oh, as for the arm, the 1219 does have a better arm, and you can really fit a lot of cartridges to that. They're pretty forgiving. You're usually running it somewhere at around 1.7 to 2 grams, and a good match for a 1219 is something like you've seen in that picture, like an older Shure cartridge. I don't think you can go wrong with that. They just kind of are quite fitting, you know, vintage speaking, with that turntable, a good match. Now, in terms of comparative between the 1218 and the 19, the 1218 is a good bargain. And up until probably this year, I would have said, if you're looking for a turntable, a vintage table on a budget, maybe it's a first-time table, or you're looking for a cool vintage table to match, you know, an old receiver that you've got or something like that, the 1218 gives you or gets you the 1219 looks and very similar performance for probably about $100 to $150 less. Now, it's 2024, and I've noticed that the prices in general have kind of slipped a little bit out there. So you can probably get a 1219 right now for $250 to $300, whereas last year a good example might be $100 more. Given that, I think it's really worth saving up and stepping up to the 1219. If someone was to A/B them kind of on the fly, you might not pick up on the differences, you know, just by, you know, listening off the bat, because they do sound quite similar. However, with some critical listening, and I'm not saying the 1219 is necessarily a critical listening table. It's not. It's a rhythmic, fun, warm sounding table, and it's just great for vinyl, but it's not a critical listening table. But with a little bit of attention and, you know, kind of really tuning in on that table, I do think the heavier platter and the better arm provides a blacker background on that turntable, and it's less susceptible for vibration. And I do believe the specs, and we'll take a look at that next here on the 1219, probably display that too, but I got a feeling they're awfully similar to that of the 1218. It would be a great table, particularly the 1219, if you made a custom plinth for it, because again, in typical dual fashion, they just provide you what you really needed. Now, something to look out for on those. The RCAs suck on all of them. The good news is you can unplug them, you know, right from the bottom and put your own RCAs on it, which I recommend highly. The covers are typically cracked, and that's because when people open them, the bottom kind of has a notch out in it, and it kind of slides underneath into the plinth, and that undue pressure on those covers would always crack them. So pay particular attention. Try to find an example with a good cover, because buying that cover separately somewhere like eBay, it's just not really financially feasible. I mean, you're paying, you know, probably a couple $100 for a cover anyways by the time you get it to you. So start with a good example, with a good cover, and they are, for the most part, completely repairable and serviceable turntables, and there's enough parts out there that you really can't go wrong with them. So there's kind of the comparative of the 1218 and the 1219, both great turntables, but I think the 1219 edges out over the 1218. Now you might have expected that. So on our next video here on the Vintage Vibe, we're going to take a look at the Elac, the Miracord 45, which in similar fashion to the 1219 and the dual 1218, it's a German-made turntable. It's an Idler turntable. We'll see what the differences are of those, and we'll also take a peek at the Mitsubishi turntable, the LV, I think it's LV05 is what that turntable is, and we'll take a look at, again, some of the common challenges that you might run into looking for, in particular, the Mitsubishi, because that's a little bit of an odd duck. But the Miracord does have a couple little things that you need to pay particular attention to, as I found out after acquiring one of these. So I'll give you a couple little tips to fix, in particular, the suspension on that table, because there's some issues around that in general. Without letting too much out, join me next time on the Vintage Vibe. Hopefully you got a little bit out of this week's episode. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon to wrap this all up. Thanks.